Hi, friends. You're watching The Naked Empire, and my name's Trish Roberts. I have a lovely guest with me today, and his name is Gerry Georgatos. Sorry, I've had trouble pronouncing that name. Gerry has won awards for his investigative journalism. He has published investigative reports with several publications, including the National Indigenous Times, the National Indigenous Radio Service, and The Stringer. In 2013, the Government of New South Wales named Gerry the Journalist of the Year at its annual Multicultural Media Awards. In 2014, he was presented with an award for courage and commitment to social justice and human rights at the National Indigenous Human Rights Awards. Gerry has done extensive research into Aboriginal incarceration, suicide, and deaths in custody, and worked on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Suicide Prevention Evaluation Project. He sits on the Federal Government Board, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Advisory Group. And that's just a few of Gerry's wonderful accomplishments, and he's a very humble man. Anyway, so without further ado, I'll introduce Gerry to you. Hi, Gerry.
Hi, Trish. Hi, everybody.
There's a few people saying hello to you, Gerry. So Gerry, if you could just tell us how you became involved with Indigenous communities in Australia, please.
Okay, well, I'm 55 years of age now, and I've spent decades in communities right across the continent. I've travelled to hundreds of communities, to many communities again and again. I've travelled to one community in Central Australia just recently, Pugaja, which others know as Untitled, which is about a 5-hour drive south of Alice Springs and a couple of 100 kilometres to 300 kilometres south of Uluru on APY country. I'd seen it last in the 90s, so I saw it again in 2017. I grew up in Sydney. I grew up in the Eastern Seaboard. I left Sydney 3 decades ago. Lived overseas for a little while, and then when I got back to Australia, even though the majority of my family that I grew up with are in Sydney, I finished up in the West, in Western Australia. I thought I'd be out here for a little while, and it's probably where my bones will be laid to rest now, I imagine. I've got a family here, and I work closely with communities right across Western Australia, but also across the continent. I'm also with the National Indigenous Critical Response, the suicide post-pension response, and I travel extensively with that. But part of my academic work early on was racism, the ways forward. I actually felt the hit from that. I grew up not too far from the block, Redfern. Grew up with a lot of kids there. Was born and bred actually in Homebush, and where the Olympic Village is now. It was a different place when I grew up. It was a very low-density community. And but the racism in the 60s and 70s was vivid, pronounced, and dark, and I got called all sorts of things, and I saw the diminution of the migrant communities that I'm from. And racism and the ways forward was a bent for me in terms of my academic work. That obviously led me to the First Peoples of this nation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, who have it worse, and as a nation we won't be defined properly till...
Oh, hold on, Gerry. Hold on, Gerry. Sorry, it's getting the sounds a little bit. We're having a few sound issues today. Where I'm in Tasmania and Gerry's in Western Australia, so sometimes the sound gets a little bit muffled. So I might have to ask Gerry to just speak a little bit slower, so we can catch that. Sorry about that, interrupting, Gerry.
Yeah. So I was saying that the racism of the 60s and 70s, which was my forming content as a toddler and as a young person, was quite pronounced. That left an impact upon me. It's become part of my academic work, the predominant part, particularly the ways forward. That led me to obviously the First Peoples of this continent who have it worse. And if we get it right for the First Peoples, we get it right for everybody as a polycultural nation, and maybe then become truly an authentic multicultural nation. So we've got a long journey to go. But my experiences in terms of the ways forward from racism, whether in whatever field I was in, health, education, welfare, has led me to hundreds of First Nations communities, homelands right around the continent, and I've become a brother with everybody since. But yeah, I'm of the view that we're all, despite the racialized lens that we have, that we're all one people, but there are racialized wrongs, and it's those wrongs that have pronounced the racialism and factions divided us. But I see hope, but I also see grim realities. I also see for a significant proportion, let's say, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, the black population, that much will continue to get worse before it gets better.
Yes, when you say much will continue to get worse before it gets better, is that, due to the, we were just talking yesterday about how the Australian government has a very, very poor track record of, they recently did a survey of Indigenous people in Uluru about how things should move forward, and yet they didn't really take on those suggestions by Indigenous people in Uluru, and that just seems to be a typical response of sort of the tokenism, or the token sort of showing interest in Indigenous people's issues, and yet really just doing whatever they want after they sort of consult them. And this is sort of just an ongoing kind of a, it's just a sort of a racism really in the with the Australian government, that's what they keep doing over and over again. Would you say that's a correct assessment of?
That's a good assessment. There's nothing new there in terms of the response from governments when their paradigm has been one of a stronghold of assimilation. That's their narrative, assimilation, a narrow corridor of discourse. They don't take on a polycultural circumstance. They don't take on a multicultural authenticity, the recognizing of people's identity and various form and content of a people, and the unfolding that needs to be had from that in order that we can be with each other, alongside each other. What we're trying to do is squeeze out from people their identity, make that identity consequently a liability, and give them the only option of assimilation. That has led to a narrative of human misery and suffering, of people lost, of this censorship of identity, the omission of identity, cultural and traditional and historical and contemporary, translating toxically as racism. It's an internalized grief that sometimes plays out in the direst of circumstance. Why I say it's going to get worse before it gets better is I look at the suicide crisis, and predominantly I'm a researcher, and also from the experiential, not just from the desktop researcher. I travel widely and mix it with people at that very cold-face level. 1 in 18 of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander deaths is a suicide. That's as worse as we've got. 1 in 18. That's a horrific, harrowing, staggering narrative. But in terms, Tricia, of the real extent of the suicide, it's actually 1 in 10 because of underreporting issues and colonial determinations. But it's 1 in 10. That's amongst the world's highest suicide rates, racialized. And the more west we go across the continent, the worse it gets. I look at the fact that incarceration is, we have the highest incarceration rate of the people racialized in the world, higher than the African American jail rate, which is 2,300 per 100,000 population. The Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander jail rate is 2,400. And in Western Australia, it's 4,000. The more west we go, the greater it hits for the first peoples of this continent. The worse the poverty, the more acute that poverty, the higher the homelessness rates, the higher the arrest rates, the higher the jail rates, the higher the suicide rates, the higher the unnatural death rates, the lower the life expectancy.
Yes, when you say too the lower the life expectancy, that's a really sort of outrageous issue in Australia, isn't it? The life expectancy of Indigenous people. And I mean, you actually, I remember reading just recently, or a few months ago, there was somebody talking about suicides, Indigenous youth suicides, and that alarming rate. There was an 11-year-old, I think, was it a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old suicided in Western Australia, wasn't it? I mean, it was,
There's been both, but you're obviously talking about the 10-year-old in Luma. There's been an
yes,
11-year-old also in Geraldton.
yeah.
But
I mean, it's just unimaginable at that age, to be that, sort of, I mean, it's just sort of a outrageous and like a tragedy that a 10-year-old and an 11-year-old would kill themselves because life is so, is so untenable and everything is, and it's not surprising because as you say, it's been a systematic destruction of that culture through assimilation, through the stolen generations. And I mean, would you say that, I was going to actually get to that about, the suicide rate in the Kimberleys in Western Australia. Like, would you say that it's the ongoing attempts of assimilation and the lack of services and just basically from the word go when Australia was colonised and there was an ongoing genocide? I mean, this is just probably all a combination of all those factors ongoing that has led to these alarming rates of youth suicide. Would you say that's a fair assessment of that?
Well, genocide by definition means a systematic destruction of the people, the effective annihilation of the people. And I'd say that that's a fair call, that generationally there's been a transmission of a policy of assimilation as the only option for the first peoples of this continent. Also for any peoples of this continent, the migrant peoples of this continent too, or the migrant peoples since the 1900s, and the White Australia policy and the Yellow Peril policy, and the whole bent of doing assimilation. I've been to many countries around the world in my travels. I find Australia, despite its various presumption of liberties, its relative affluence, one of the most conservative and minimalist, in terms of its discourse, minimalist and restrictive, and conservative nations on the planet. It isn't one of the most progressive nations. If it was progressive, it would have a much more libertarian approach. It would be much more liberal in the true sense of its meaning, in people reflecting their identities, reflecting their culture, reflecting who they want to be, how they want to live, how they want to bring up their families and their communities in this country. We don't have that richness of diversity. We have a restrictive assimilationist policy. We can flower it up with all the language in the world, all the symbolism in the world, but in terms of its living experience, we do not allow it to flourish in such circumstances as symbolism purports to say. So a lot of what we score for even Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and even the migrant peoples of this country, and the children of migrant peoples of this country with their high cultural content heritage, is purely symbolic. But it does not translate into real-time lived experiences, and it is scorned. It is scorned. So we are actually quite a conservative and certainly not a progressive nation. Certainly we are unfolding with the social justice and human rights vocabulary.
Yeah, I'm a couple of years older than you, Gerry, and I remember at school when Indigenous people were mentioned in the history books, it was as if they were a past culture. And also it was a fetishized culture, and it still is. It's like we take all the wonderful elements of it and use it in appropriations in art, and we're sort of always sort of, and they do these token kind of in the beginning of speeches, honouring the Indigenous people who, of the past, etc. And yet there's really, it's really just a lot of it is just fetishizing, Indigenous people and not really honouring them or respecting them. Because if they were truly honoured and respected, there wouldn't be this high mortality rate. There wouldn't be children
Absolutely.
killing themselves, and so it's just a sort of, and in these history books, as I say, in the 60s, they're really, there was basically this nod to them as if they have already gone. And of course, I live in Tasmania, where almost I think every Indigenous person was killed when the colonizers came here, the European colonizers came here, and it's just sort of like I just noticed that all the time in Australia, just using Indigenous art and all this sort of thing, and just pretending as if everything's just hunky dory and we're all holding hands, and you know what I mean? It's an awful thing. It's just a lie, isn't it?
Well,
really? I mean,
absolutely. These are the cheap acknowledgements that we take, the tokenism that you referred to. I grew up in that schooling where it was only mere reference to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It was not even the noble savage. It was the mere reference to a past culture. At that time, in the 60s and 70s, the presumption would have been that they're assimilating, and everything presented about them was those of a past culture assimilating forward, or trapped in a rejection of assimilation and in the poverty of their day, the shanty towns, the villages, and so forth, and the predicaments that came with that, the narrative of human suffering and misery. It's the same sort of fetishizing of migrants too that were had, who were coming to this continent and were limited and restricted to food, song and dance, and even less so for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for a period of time. What we celebrate today is still a fetishization of peoples, is still mere acknowledgements and symbolisms. And we don't flesh out anything in terms to entitle people to their well-being, in terms of historical and contemporary identity. And we're trying to corral people into that narrow corridor of the last 100 and 200 years, depending on where we are in this continent, of invader identity politics, and no more than that. And this has actually come at a cost of human life. And
yes.
Look, let me just say this, Tricia.
Sure.
The consequence of the past wrongs, the cruel and brutal and evil wrongs of eugenics, social engineering, and their purpose to extinguish these past cultures in terms of a contemporary stance, the apartheid wrongs, the missions, the reserves, the corrals, the socioeconomic norms that were born of that, and are presumed to be cultural norms that have taken in their own of hurting themselves with each other, the curfews and the rejection of their right to even attend school, have led to some actually assimilating and trying to herd the others through that path, who are trapped still in poverty today. But the poverty is extensive. The consequence of the past and the rejection of the contemporary to address the poverty of less than 2.7% of the population, of whom only 1.5% of that 2.7% are actually living in poverty. 40% of our black brothers and sisters live below the poverty line, Nearly 100% of the suicides of our black brothers and sisters are of those living below the poverty line. So the answers and the ways forward aren't rocket science. And the highest suicide rates and aberrant behaviour, highest arrest rates and jail rates are actually in the high cultural content communities. Culture is something that can't be taken away from people. Yes, it's been a disruption and a maximisation of harm and interruption to that experience of culture and to the transmission of culture, but it's still in the Kimberley, in the Northern Territory, in far north Queensland, in the Western Desert, that we have the highest suicide rates, that we have the highest arrest rates, the highest jail rates, and we aren't doing anything about investing in the right for people to navigate two cultural settings. We are telling them, leave your communities, relocate, I'm not going to provide you services, come to the cities, live for a couple of generations in the city. Some of you will live in a narrative of human misery and suffering. You will die. You will live your whole lives poor. Maybe your great-grandchildren or whatever will have the opportunity to score an education and quid and so forth, as effectively default white Australians in tune with the invader mindset and set of values.
Yeah. What do you think? What's it like working on the board in the federal government, Gerry? Like, I mean, what is it? How do they respond? Do they actually take on sort of real feedback, or is it they pretend to take it on? How is that for you?
There are some, well, I'll explain that in a number of ways.
Mm,
I am who I am, and I wish many others would be, because it would then mean that we're not rogue, and that we'd be an army of voices, a multitude of voices, and then we'd get the cultural shift. But I am who I am 24/7, at the coalface, in the media, also in my engagements with government, with boards that I'm on. I'm a polarizing individual. I admit that. I lead far from the front. I've made a lot of enemies and frenemies. Had patch of jobs done on me because I've gone really hard. I've been ostracized. But I'd rather be who I am and have achieved some of the things that I have achieved. If my colleagues and I've seen some of them soak up the right to be fearless and the right to be who you should be. Obviously, you can't burn all bridges, and
mm,
you don't necessarily go after the transgressor as opposed to the transgressions. I have challenged transgressors at times when they were the transgression effectively, but it's the systemic transgressions we've got to chase down, and if we're going to make a systemic difference. But look, uh, a lot of what I've actually done, and I've looked at it the last several years, instead of always working from behind the scenes to support others, to be the voices that they should be, the opportunities that they should have. I've got to a point where I feel, whether it's black, brown, or white brothers and sisters, uh, not enough's been said when I see the grim realities of much getting worse for a significant proportion of the population before there's any chance of it getting better. So I've even myself stepped out more in the last decade to the forefront and made more enemies in that regard. But the combination of nurturing good friends in the media, good people in the media, because I believe compassion. I'm a left winger. I'm as radical a left winger as possible. That radical a left winger that the Greens can even tolerate me. My vote still goes their way. But I was even too radical and authentic as a left winger to be countenanced as part of even their wide church. But I prefer to be who I am, and look, going back to what I said, nurture uh, good friends in the media to have the dialogue, to have the discussions, to tell the stories, to talk of the ways forward, and then to chase that down with the lobbying and the arguing and speaking up that needs to be had by many, many, many more in the bureaucracy of the political machinery, in that interface with parliamentarians who aren't the full quid because they haven't lived the experience. Anyone can become a parliamentarian. Anyone can become a politician except for it should be.
Could I just interrupt, Gerry, for a sec? Who would you say are your sort of allies in this, in say, government politicians? Are there any Greens politicians who are...
all the Greens allies in that sense. I have a lot of respect for Lee Rhiannon. I think that she's a strong individual in terms of the language that she goes about with. I've done a few things with the Greens in the past. I am one of the people that was responsible for the freedom of the Indonesian children who are in prisons, in adult prisons in this country, who come across as cooks and deckhands on boats giving safe passage to asylum with refugees. I was one of the people that discovered them in the jails in my prison visits, and I'm one of the people that actually campaigned the house down and strategized the campaign to secure their freedom. And Lee Rhiannon helped me immensely with that. She was the first parliamentarian to chase it down in Parliament. She actually went into Senate estimates and challenged the ASIO chief and got him to admit that they knew about these children in adult prisons as young as 13, 14, and 15. Went all the way to me. Anyway, but you asked me a question about the Greens. So Sarah Hanson-Young then followed suit, and so on. But in general ethic and in terms of values, I see the Greens as particularly with social justice issues on a neoliberal project. So I'm with them on all those issues, and we're allies in that sense. In terms of other political parties, well, compassion belongs to the right, left, and whoever. It's the compassion I tap into the people to try and make them understand about ways forward. I found it really hard, for instance, with the last Labor government to actually get them across the line on certain issues. It was either their way or the highway. I was reductionist and minimalist. I was disappointed because I've been a Labor voter all my life till the Greens came along, and then I started throwing my vote across the way of the Greens.
And you also, sorry, Gerry, you also were involved with the WikiLeaks party for a little while there, weren't you?
Well, that was a bit of a disaster, but
yeah.
it's still with great pride that we made some mistakes. The New South Wales WikiLeaks mob or whatever, I made a mess of their preferences. That had an impact on all of us, and then we were seen as a threat to other parties. Look, it would have been a beautiful thing. It's sad that it didn't happen. I got close to being elected. I was between 1,800 to 2,000 votes. I was the one that missed out. We were trying to parachute in there Julian Assange. We were trying to parachute in myself, and we were trying to parachute in there Kelly Trampman from New South Wales. Had we three got in there, we would have challenged and radicalised the discourse. We weren't individuals that we would have confined ourselves to a consensus of understandings or to a certain pitch that was agreed in the kitchen cabinet. We were going to be freewheeling individuals who were going to come from a lot of experience, and we were individuals that actually had never compromised ourselves ever. And that's actually what the Senate needed, that party room with hacks and lobbyists and fixers needed to have the discourse radicalised. It still isn't. It still isn't. You know, the best that we've got are the Greens, and some people on the presumed left. I don't believe there's any authentic left in Parliament. Not the presumed left of the Labor Party, but had we got in, we would have had a whole different discourse today. We would have had articulate and strong individuals and raising issues and in the ways that should be raised without worrying about what's being said.
So, Gerry, I was just going to ask you, how could Australians and the wider community, because I mean this issue of Indigenous oppression and trying to destroy not only the people themselves but take over their sacred lands. I mean, you have this in Standing Rock in the United States, and this constant battle, to hold on to land which is, which is very, very sacred to them. And this happens in Australia too. It's a sort of an ongoing battle with Indigenous people in Australia to prevent mining. I think there was a recent victory against a mining company just recently. But I mean, the fact that we always have to be struggling. I mean, they always have to be struggling for, it's neoliberalism, of course, has made things much, much worse. This sort of putting the market over everything. And of course, Indigenous people represent a kind of an it's not surprising that neoliberalism and governments are trying to destroy Indigenous people, because in many ways they're sort of anti-capitalist, really, aren't they? I mean, they're about nurturing the earth, about all of that. So I mean, it's a sort of not surprising. Yes. So it's like this ongoing sort of it's really not really addressing these issues. They're in some ways, and I'm going to be very blunt here, they're hoping that Indigenous people will just die out or be so assimilated that it's just not an issue anymore. I mean, this is the feeling I get anyway. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I'll go to Dr. Gary Foley. He, in the past, has referenced a couple of times the probability of the total assimilation of these peoples right across all the cultures of the first peoples across the continent. Even though we've still got high cultural content communities and regions in the Matsu country, Western Desert, Yolngu country, and many other places. And we've got to remember that some regions in Australia didn't have significant white contact until the 1950s and 60s. So we've got less than 70 years of significant white contact. But even Dr. Gary Foley believes that the total assimilation of the first peoples of this continent will be done and dusted between 3/4 of a century. And that's the agenda that neoliberalism, capitalism, neoliberalism is an expansion of a pronounced contemporary reality of the ongoing human narrative of thousands of years that's been bent by greed and the meritocracy and elite and everybody else's function to drudgery and indenture.
Yes.
And that's what continues on this day and plays out in other ways. So that meritocracy continues for that sliver of humanity that's an elite and exploits others. And therefore, it is regardless. They have no regard. They aren't other regarding of peoples, for instance, such as the first peoples and the descendants of the first peoples, wherever in the South Americas or the Americas or in Africa or on this continent or in Southeast Asia, and investing in them. Because look at Australia. Australia is the 12th biggest economy on the planet. Western Australia has the world's highest median wages, on average. And its median wage is highest in the world. Northern Territory, third highest. Yet we have amongst the poorest people, the first peoples on the planet living in this country. And let me just give you the stats on that. If you're black and you're born in the Northern Territory, you have a 3 in 4 chance of living poor your whole life, living below the poverty line, and a significant proportion dirt poor, third world in poverty. And that's a 2 in 3 chance if you're born black in Western Australia. And 1 in 13 of all Aboriginal adult males is in prison today. That 1 in 13 of Aboriginal adult males in prison today is the highest racialized jailing rate in the world, higher than the African American black.
So 1 in 13 males. So it's the highest incarceration rate in the world, really, in a way.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yes.
Higher than apartheid South Africa, higher than contemporary South Africa, higher than the Americas, the United States. And the United States is the mother of all jailers. And the United States is 1 in 4 of the world's prisoners. And but still, when disaggregated through that racialized lens, we have in Western Australia 1 in 13 of our Aboriginal adult males in prison today. And look, what I'm saying is we are the 12th biggest economy on the planet. And yet we can't get right for 80,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Western Australia and 80,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Northern Territory, their right to be lifted out of poverty. I've been to Good Island many times. In Good Island, a community, 3 communities, 1,500 people, the whole population of Good Island, 1,500 people, only 3 kids, black, have ever graduated school in the entire history from the schools of Good Island, on that island. Only 3 kids. What hope? What hope for that generation? That's the lack of neglect, and that's the lack of damning and indictment of the government that needs to be had and should be told. And these are the grim realities of stories that should be had. Because if these were white kids and even brown kids, it wouldn't be permissible, it would not be allowed. Gumbalanya in the army, its first 2 female high school graduates, black, were 2013. So there's no opportunity to navigate 2 cultural settings, that of the mainstream and that of one's own, without impact upon their actual life circumstances, and then therefore impact psychosocially on the positive self, on the ability to put food on the table for their kids. There's a lot of displaced danger out there. There's a lot of pain and suffering, and it's actually much worse than what it was 20 and 30 years ago, before the betrayal of all these expectations that were once held in hope following the Black Power movement, following the Aboriginal Embassy, following the land rights movements of the 60s, 70s and 80s, following all the expectations that some had even in native title. There's now a divide, not just black and white. There's now a divide between black and black in the sense that there are haves and have-nots. And the have-nots are in a difficult predicament much more today than what all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were in the 60s and 70s, and there was some hope for all of them. Today there's some hope for some of them. Some have been lifted by affirmative actions and opportunities, but there's no hope. There's no hope for many of them, because those affirmative actions are drying up or are not being done on a triage-based, needs-based approach. And an investment in them is not being made, and we're going to lose many more children. The tragedy of child suicide in this country, remembering that 2.7% of the Australian population are the descendants of the first people to this continent. But when it comes to their children, they are about 4.5% or 4% of the total population of the child population, Australian child population. But 30% of Australia's child suicides are Aboriginal children. And 80% of child suicides, 12 years and less, are of Aboriginal children. 80%. Tricia, the nation should weep. It's an
Yeah,
abomination, moral, political, and otherwise. And it's
and
only
it's
going to get worse.
and it's really not. It's really not sort of being. I mean, do you think it's being highlighted in the media? I mean, does programs like Q&A on the ABC, do they actually ever get you on there? I find their whole discussions are often just this narrow spectrum, as Noam Chomsky calls it, of lively debate, and anything that's actually real is kind of outside of that. And this is a real issue, which is really basically, it's just going by the board in a way, isn't it? Really, it's just
Tricia,
they're just
I would,
hoping that go away, sort of thing.
if
You know what I mean?
Q&A, if Q&A would get someone like me onto its panel, I would say that's a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
With all due respect to Q&A, I know it's got solid ratings. I've talked about minimalism and reductionism. It is a minimalist and reductionist discourse. It's a strict corridor of discourse. It has people from it claims it has the left on its program. It doesn't have the left on its program at any time. It tinkers with a formula that is very rarely moved away from. Labor
Mm.
Liberal, who are effectively the same,
Yeah,
they only appear vastly
yeah.
different because
There's
we have such
only There's only a thin sliver of daylight between the two major parties, just like in the United States. They're just there's this thin sliver of difference, and they pretend that they're different. It's just it's
well,
appalling.
they appear different because we are as a nation very conservative, and we are as a nation a narrow corridor of discourse. We have values that are, many of them are quite regressive. We aren't as progressive as many European nations. We are certainly not as progressive as many nations in South America or even many nations throughout Africa, despite all their problems, poverty related. And we
How
aren't.
come do you think? Oh, I'm sorry, Gerry. I was just wondering, why do you think Australia has become? I feel like it's actually going backwards. And why do you think this has sort of come about? That it's sort of actually going? And I didn't think it could possibly go backwards. I mean, it was pretty racist when I was growing up, and older generations are quite racist. I've heard some awful things from even my northern some people I knew in the Northern Territory. I just kind of I just wonder how it's managed to. I mean, I think it's probably been helped definitely by the lack of any sort of real discussion about issues. But what do you think is sort of why Australia seems to be going backwards in this regard?
Well, as a young child, I imagined it was going to go forwards. And for a while, it appeared to me that it was going forward. I was overseas for a lot of the 80s and early 90s. But in the 80s, I held some hope that we were going actually forward. We've gone backwards, particularly in the 90s, and particularly this last 15, 16 years. We've gone, I look at the refugee crisis. In the 80s, I don't want to romanticize it because it was still a harsh experience. It was still offshore. There were 400,000 refugees that fled the Khmer Rouge, that fled Vietnam. My sister-in-law was a little baby in one of those boats in Vietnam that almost sunk. And refugees were taken to Hailing Chau, the rocky outcrop island in Hong Kong, a barbed wire fence, UNHCR camps, nevertheless. Babies were born there, people died there. It was austere and ruthless and vicious. Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, and all of them were there to support them, save the children. The other camp was Goang in Indonesia, opened in 1979, closed in 1996. 17 years it took to relocate the refugees. But believe it or not, thanks to someone, it's little known, I've written about it in the Adelaide Advertiser once, and he actually thanked me once for writing about it, because before Google and all that, but Google up these days, I many people have written about it. But it was actually Andrew Peacock. One
Andrew
of the
Peacock, yeah.
one of the arch conservatives of our time. who actually tapped into his compassion because he had just got out of Cambodia as the kind of route of coming in, walking all over the whole country and seen some of the pending atrocities. And he had threatened his own government and cabinet that he would resign if they did not take in, he would resign not only from cabinet, but from the party, if they did not support these refugees from Cambodia, from Kampuchea, and Vietnam into Australia. And they did. It was because of him in particular. So Fraser backed him. His cabinet papers have shown that John Howard was opposed. He was a junior parliamentary minister at the time. He was opposed, and others were opposed too. But the party imploding.
I'm sorry, just for the the people watching, John Howard was the former Prime Minister of Australia eventually. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So that conservatism that was being challenged by the peacocks of the day in terms of progressive thinking within a right-wing paradigm such as the Liberal Party and the Country Party of the day, that has gone backwards. Because I was going to say he went on to become Prime Minister of the country, but Australia agreed to take in 40,000 refugees with little fanfare, little media attention, and people were coming to Australia from Vietnam and Cambodia through those offshore processing detention centres. Not nice places. And they were putting Australia first because Australia had cut through the red tape. They were choosing Australia before Canada and the United States because we were processing them faster than anyone else. In the end, Australia...
And look at us now. And look at Australia now. It's like we've got them out we've had them in offshore detention centres. This is now, we've become a nation which now vilifies Muslims just like any other neoliberalist kind of governments that are around the place. And and we know that, they target Muslims now because they're Western countries are going into their countries and destroying them so we can get resources and hegemony in the region. So one after the other of Muslim majority countries being destroyed. And so, it's a common thing now for the governments to, vilify Muslims, just like in the United States. And now these people are being sort of left to rot in these detention centres.
Because our parliamentarians don't have the sense of strong conviction, of immutable conviction that they should have. In the end, in the 80s, we took all the way to 96, 70,000. We took more than what we expected or whatever, and not much fanfare or cruelty in the media or shock jock journalism was shot around about that. But it's our parliamentarians led the way is what I'm trying to say at that time. Compassion led the way, sensible thinking led the way. For all these, whether I disagree with a lot of his form and content as an elitist and a conservative in general, Andrew Peacock, a conviction that he was prepared to actually quit a party, putting people before himself, led him to take a stance that took in 70,000 refugees to this country without vilification of them. And they had decided to not make any media hype about that and just bring them in quietly. But what actually happened, our leadership let us down. Our leadership let us down with the Tampa. Kim Beazley did similarly so and just supported the John Howard bit, because they actually chose what they presumed votes and over and winning elections over what's right, over their convictions, over principles. They compromised their principles. Once they did that once, they did it twice, they did it three times. This is it's difficult to believe this, but I'll tell it to you. Kevin Rudd came in to power in 07, and I actually threw my vote his way in 07 thinking I might make some difference because he had some bent that that from my personal engagements with him, I thought his ego was such that he would try and go for a multitude of changes, and in the first few years he was trying to do that. But 9 days before he was tossed out by
This is for the people watching. Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister of Australia, former Prime Minister of Australia. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, 9 days. He came to one of those community cabinet meetings and led them. Julie Gillard was there, and Bill Shorten was there, and Penny Wong was there, and the whole entourage was present. This was in Perth, Western Australia. In the front row was myself, and at that time my 9-year-old daughter. My daughter has a photo with him that we still keep. 9 days later, he would be rejected by his party and replaced by Julia Gillard. It was evident that was on the horizon. But I did talk to him that day on a couple of occasions. I still remember Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd standing side by side talking to myself and in particular to my 9-year-old daughter. I talked to him at the end of it about the refugees. Kevin said to me, Gerry, this is no sign ironic for people. He put his hand on his heart and said, I'm a socialist. But people don't understand that. I can't talk in socialist language out there or we won't get the votes. We won't be in power. It's a complex gig that politics actually is. And I said, Kevin, that's all bullshit. You are who you are 24/7, or if you're not, then you're somebody else when you present yourself to the nation. And look, we did talk about the refugees. And I said to him this, you guys have lurched so far to the right, that you're destroying lives. These party room hacks or whatever were having a real go at me. But I said, in the end...
You said that, I'm sorry, Gerry, did you actually say that to Kevin Rudd, that your party's lurching so far to the right? And for people watching, Kevin Rudd was the Prime Minister and he was head of the Labor Party. He was the Labor Party was in government.
And in his desperation, 9 days later, I couldn't believe it. Well, I'm making this connection because I believe our conversation was quite vivid, and I gave him a letter too that he kept and put in his pocket. And I know he passed on to one of his staffers who wrote to me later about that. Anyway, his staffer took a defensive pose about offshore detention and onshore detention. And when he was deposed for Julia Gillard, in his speech when he came out, and he actually said that we are lurching to the right. He actually took a whole different stance once he's deposed.
Yeah. A bit late then.
Yeah,
a bit late then.
A few years later, when he deposed Julia Gillard and got in there for that last run, a couple of months with that disastrous election for them, that they were wiped out by the Abbott government.
Yes.
The
Abbott government, yes. Tony Abbott, yes.
He didn't live up to anything that he purported.
No, it's typical.
What we needed was, even though I'm a radical left winger and an uncompromising left winger, what we need, whether you're the left or the centre or the right, is conviction in something that you believe in. And we had that with Andrew Peacock in the early 80s, and he didn't actually get lauded for it. It's only become known to some a little bit later. I knew it from then. But he was prepared to resign because he put people first. He didn't put the political machinery, he didn't put his position, he didn't put himself, he didn't put the economy or anything like that before people. He put people first. He said, we cannot stitch these people. We will help them in, or I resign, I'm gone as a politician, period. But the current crop have not done this. So it's our leadership that's the problem. It's our leadership that has taken us back. It's our leadership that buys in the sharehold of conservative or punitive politics. It's our leadership that finishes people up incarcerated. It's our leadership that makes the decisions, that legislates, and if we have to blame someone, yes, we have to blame them. Our leaders actually have a lot of blame.
And also we have to blame, in some ways, ourselves for continuing to vote these people that are they've lost all, if they ever had any motivation for doing anything for the masses, most of them lost that pretty quickly. And it's really just about corporations now and, just the typical neoliberalist agenda. And I was just going to go back to, Gough Whitlam, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. I mean, they managed to get rid of him in a sort of a very devious way. And apparently I read that the CIA was involved in that, the American CIA.
Pine Gap.
Yeah, and they helped to oust Gough Whitlam, who was actually really quite socialist in many ways. And he was sort of going to do some really great things. And so they managed to get rid of them, and then it was all downhill from there. And Malcolm Fraser, in fact, Malcolm Fraser, who was also the Prime Minister after that, who was put into power after Gough Whitlam was, what did they call that again when he was taken out? Anyway, he was just thrown out, and then Malcolm Fraser was put in. But anyway, I just wanted to, if I may, just talk about back to the youth suicides. I was just wondering if you sort of, how do you actually go about it? I mean, are you basically addressing that issue via the federal government, or when you go visit Indigenous communities, like how do you go about sort of discussing this issue and the like?
Predominantly in the last 10 years I've been a suicide, despite the foray into journalism and despite the many other things I've done in the time I've spent in the tertiary sector. I'm a suicide prevention researcher, and particularly on the ways forward, particularly on understanding the psychosocial self and what it takes in real time to actually support an individual. And that takes relentless psychosocial support. What I like seeing are real-time projects. I'm sick and tired of the abstract. I'm sick and tired of desktop literature being lauded as some way forward. I'm sick and tired of the investment and the reinvestment and the ongoing investment in best practice hubs and more research in suicide and suicide prevention when we know what the issues are. People just need people. People need to be supported, to be validated, to spread the love, the salt of the earth approach, and to be relentless and relentless in a full approach with people, to be there for the vulnerable. And I distinguish, and it will probably become the language of the future, I distinguish the vulnerable. You've got the vulnerable and the at-risk, but you've also got the critically vulnerable and the critically at-risk. The vulnerable may put up their hand or be referred by a family member for support, or walk through some door, or pick up a phone, walk through a door into a service for support. The critically vulnerable and the critically at risk tell nobody anything. You know, maybe off the rails, maybe homeless, maybe in the most pronounced negative behaviour, but they will never tell anybody that they're suicidal. They will never tell anybody that they've lost all sense of hopelessness and they're helpless. They will never scream for help. Well, we don't have the outreach that should be there for them, and you've got to go to them. And you've got to be there for them. And I've spent a good part of my life doing that sort of outreach in various fields, and it's changed lives. And I have the experiential where, you know, I won't say 100% of the time, but in some instances, in some programs, it has been 100%, in other programs, near 100%. Where you support people relentlessly, we transform lives, we change lives, we improve their lives. And there's no greater legacy, Tricia, than we can have, and to improve a lot of another to the point of changing lives, saving lives.
You know what gives me hope, Gerry, is the recent sort of election in the United Kingdom with Jeremy Corbyn doing very well, even though he didn't win. I sort of feel like there's this groundswell of a change happening where people are utterly sick and tired of the mean-spirited, disgusting austerity born through this neoliberalism that happened in the early 80s. And it's really anti-human, you know, what's been happening in the world today in by various governments towards the people. It's actually anti-people, anti-human. And I sort of feel like there's a real sort of groundswell of change happening with people fed up. You know, it's definitely happening in the United States too, and I don't think Australia's woken up to what's actually happening. It's a sort of that awful speciesist thing of the boiling frogs thing. I think Australia hasn't woken up to the fact that we're going to end up like the United States and the United Kingdom, and we are going that way. And I just sort of, I don't know. I just feel like. Do you feel like that there's have you felt some hope with that?
I always feel hope. I always feel hope, and I'm always optimistic. But I'm always saying it's going to get worse before it gets better, and I believe it will. So I believe a lot of the debate around the world from some is reasonably minded, and the majority is muddle-minded, and from others who refuse and reject what the muddle-minded and the reasonably minded have to say. They're completely lost the plot. They're the elites. They're the established classes that continue to still reject what the groundswell is telling them, and they're trying to oppress that groundswell. Let's not forget the Occupy movement in the United States during the Arab Springs, saw 8,000 arrests of occupiers to break that movement, to break the spirit of that movement. So while, Obama was in power, talking about let the Arab Spring flourish, And, and it's brought its chaos through the Arab Spring because of the meddling behind the scenes and all the stuff that they do to destabilise governments and the potential for positive norms in these nations. And in their own country, they were smashing the American Spring. They were smashing the American Spring, and with little mention in the media about that relative contextual, other than say something like democracy now to some extent. But 8,000 arrests, 700 arrests were on the Brooklyn Bridge in one hit of occupiers to break that. So in the end, I see hope. I see an unfolding social justice and human rights language. I may see it a little bit reductionist, and not in the ways that someone like me would like to see it much more expansive and diverse and polycultural and the right for people to be who they want to be. But I see also great poverty on the horizon for many, and Australia will not be spared. Australia is conservative, and it is one of the more conservative nations on the planet. And it is still behind the times and hasn't had that groundswell that has been had, for instance, in Great Britain, in Europe, in North Africa, and other places, even including right across Asia and some parts of the Americas. But I think we've got a long way to go. But let me just touch on poverty. We look at Australia. I wrote this piece and it's been picked up by others, and now others are writing more about that. And I made a point, and I think you've even seen on the right-wing programs, Sky News and all that, and beginning to talk about that because poverty touches people, and it might be what the galvanising effect or the mechanism that's needed to actually generate that type of groundswell. But I don't know if that will address the multitude of issues, the humanistic issues. It's more about the self still when it comes to poverty that we are impacted by it. But Australia's poverty, Australia's unemployment rate isn't 5 or 6%, as is officially registered. It's about 30 to 35%. 30 to 35% of Australians are unemployed. All the homeless people in this country, the 100+ thousand, who are probably more 200,000, but the census says 105,000, they're not counted. They're not counted as unemployed. To be considered unemployed, you must be on Centrelink, and you must, to be considered unemployed, have
Centrelink. For those who are watching, Centrelink is the social security aspect of Australian thing.
There must be on unemployment benefits in the least or whatever, and must have actively looked for work in the last 30 days. And, and in terms of the quota that they've got in terms of their looking for work job activity, which I believe is about 20 to 30, I can't remember. But if you haven't done that in the last 30 days, you're not actually logged as unemployed. Also, there's 1.1 million Australians who work between 1 to 10 hours. Whether you work an hour or 2 hours a week, you're considered employed. You're considered employed. So we've got a horrific crisis of underemployment.
That looks good for the statistics, but it's no good for. Yeah.
They spend a fortune. Australian governments, like other foreign governments, spend an incredible amount of money in skewing the data, in getting all their in getting all their government departments and the ancillary departments, even ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, to change the formula and look to a different methodology and a different lens at the data so they could play it down. But look, unemployment in this country is between 30 to 35%. It's not 5 to 6. The poverty line is not 12% of Australians living below the poverty line. It's more like 30 to 35%. And that's going to get worse. More and more people are going to be underemployed. More and more people are going to be casualised. More and more people are going to be unemployed in the decades to come ahead. I won't speak about in the centuries to come ahead, but in the decades to come ahead, as we transition with what technology needs to offer us and can, and what the impacts of that will be, there will be crises, poverty-related born. For instance, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters feel today for about 40%. That may play out and become pronounced also for, say, 30-40% of the Australian population in the next 20-30 years. That will create crises. That will pitch people against people. Australia has not experienced that in the way that it can.
And of course, we haven't even talked about climate change and how deadly that's going to be. I mean, it's already kind of happening dreadfully in, Australia because we're a very dry country here. And, I mean, that's going to be sort of a disaster. It's becoming a disaster in the bushfires that we have every year. And everything else,
Well,
the water shortages and all of that.
and,
And I'm
and,
sure that
and
affects Indigenous communities too, I imagine,
it affects all of us. There are no
yes,
boundaries. There are no borders in that.
that's right.
The
There's no
transmission of those
borders.
impacts are felt by
Yeah.
everybody. And let's
And
not forget
sorry, I was going to say nothing's really being done of any significance. And to be honest, I personally think it's too late anyway. There should have been the last probably time there should have been something really radically done was in the 2000s, something like that. I think after that it just became it's just I don't know.
there
We're a
are
stupid
impacts.
species.
Well, we are a stupid species, and we're wiping
Yeah,
out tens of thousands of other species in the process or whatever. I mean,
exactly,
30,000 more species are estimated to be gone by 2025.
exactly. Yeah.
And we've knocked off hundreds of thousands of species, not tens of thousands of species.
Oh yeah,
But
200 species every day are going extinct. It's just sixth mass extinction is here. So
and one of the reasons, the predominant reason I'm a vegan or whatever is because of the sentience and the impacts on our fellow species that we choose to consume as in the presumption of their food.
did you say you were vegan, Gerry? I didn't. Did you just say you were vegan?
Yes.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if you were or not, but oh, that's wonderful. Well, that's two
My,
vegans then.
yes, two vegans. My
Terrific.
daughter's
Yep.
a vegan. My partner sways back and forth or whatever.
Well, she's just naughty. We'll have to get on to her.
But, but,
um,
but, but look, when we talk about climate change, 55% of the methane that's in the atmosphere is produced by the cattle that we have on this planet that are there purely for consumption, for the meat industries, for McDonald's and for all of them. The damage that they're doing is actually worse than some of the emission, or the worst emissions in terms of methane into the atmosphere.
yes, 51% of greenhouse gases, Gerry. And people can quibble about the percentage, but 51% of greenhouse gases from the animal agriculture industry. And if anybody has any time, they should check out Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret, documentary. That's really shocking. If I think for me, the most important reason to go vegan is because non-human animals are not our resources, and we're killing 1 trillion aquatic and land animals every year for trivial reasons of mostly palate pleasure, because we don't need animal products to survive, as you would know, Gerry. But it's a sort of even just if one was going to adopt a plant-based diet, and I call it a plant-based diet instead of going vegan because vegan's an ethical issue, but if one is to adopt a plant-based diet, that's probably the best thing one can do to address, the incredible environmental devastation of, animal agriculture and most importantly for me, the tremendous violence, that we're doing to fellow, sentient beings on the planet. So yeah, I mean, sort of social justice activists, and justice is not exclusive, basically. It's not, and so we're excluding a huge amount of the population on the planet who just happen to be another species. So that's
we're a species. We're just one of the species.
That's
we're
right.
part of the animal kingdom or whatever. What you
Right.
said, that tremendous violence upon our fellow sentient creatures. And,
That's fantastic, Gerry. I didn't realize that you'd gone vegan, and so that's really great. So I just wanted to I just wanted to touch on you're also involved in wheelchairs for kids, which if you just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. And also,
okay.
if there's any way that anybody who's watching could support your work, or if there's anything that you feel that we can be better allies to Indigenous people, and that means worldwide, really, but Indigenous people in Australia, if there's anything you can do to suggest, because it's such an important issue, and we're all brothers and sisters, and we need to support one another.
We're all brothers and sisters, and as part of the animal kingdom, we're all sentient creatures or whatever, right? And we've got to respect that. And it's a vile abomination in every sense, whether moral, political, or by any vantage, to be killing other sentient creatures as a presumed food resource. And it does our health no good anyway, whether the karmic effect is a negative one. So go figure. But that's capitalism for you, and its excesses are beyond any justification, evil and cruel and an abomination of the worst type. But in terms of wheelchairs for kids, that's a charity that I've been involved with for about a dozen years. When I was Murdoch University, a student, a refugee student from Iraq, Riyad Hakim, a young man who's studying international relations, came to me one day to my office and said, "Is there any way you can help me put some funding to get wheelchairs to my people in Iraq? Because of all, 500 people are bombed each, the victims of bombings each month in Iraq, and they're all scratching around trying to survive, and they're all crawling through the dust, and a lot of these families are now single-parent families that have lost a spouse to the casualties of the war that's been inflicted and imposed upon them. The coalition of the willing, the damage that evil atrocity has done. But in the end, he wanted to help his people from the town of Samawa that he's from. And
where was that again? Sorry, Gerry. Where was that?
Samawa, Samawa. It's south of Baghdad, 300 kilometres.
South of Baghdad, right.
Yeah. In the end, I said, well, there's wheelchairs for kids. They're a charity north of in the northern suburbs of Perth. They raise about, I help them towards that too, but they raise about $1 million a year in funding.
Oh, wow, that's great.
To buy the parts to actually manufacture at that factory the wheelchairs. Right. No one, before I go further, so I don't forget, no one in that charity, and it's got 170 volunteers, most of them retirees, from all walks of life, all professions, former professions, and then 500 other ancillary workers who do all sorts of other things to make things happen. No one gets remunerated. The CEO does not get remunerated. The workshop manager does not get remunerated. No one gets remunerated. All monies raised go to the production, manufacture, packaging, and shipping of these containers of wheelchairs to predominantly places in other parts of our world where there's no opportunity to access a wheelchair. But these aren't ordinary wheelchairs. These are rough terrain wheelchairs with puncture-proof tires, with facility 2 and 3 times what it is for a normal wheelchair, because in a lot of these countries we send wheelchairs to for children. There's no maintenance available, so we need them to survive the duration of the childhood.
Yes.
This humble factory has produced 37,000 rough terrain wheelchairs, manufactured them, and shipped them to countries
How much was that? I'm sorry, Gerry. 37,000 wheelchairs.
37,000. And 73 countries we've reached. So we've reached more than 1/3 of the world, places from the Congo to Afghanistan to Iraq, and actually it was through Riyadh. It was through Riyadh, our friend, just mentioned a little bit earlier. We sent our first shipment to Iraq, and that was in 2007. And to tell you a little bit of a story about that, if we've got time.
Yes.
When I tried to get that shipment, we raised the funds for it. We got a few mob to raise the funds to get that shipment through. We got 350 wheelchairs, rough terrain for his village of Samawa. We decided to send it to 3 towns that were Sunni. One was now Sunni, 2 were Shiite. And that was a message to say that we're there for all people. And like Riyadh said before, or the coalition of the willing women, before the war, before the rest of the world got involved in the affairs of the Iraqi people, he said to me, "Gerry, there was no Sunni or Shiite. We never talked like that. We all got on. We were in the marketplaces together. We married each other. We were all just fine. This stuff is foreign intervention. This stuff is the foreign media. Yeah. And now it is embossed in our, ingrained in our people or whatever. I mean, they're the ones who actually divided us and separated us. They're the ones who fueled this and did this. Before that, we were just fine, despite Saddam Hussein, despite his own atrocities, despite his iron fist. It was all the atrocities are 100 times worse, and the divisions are 100 times worse because of foreign meddling intervention and the lies of the foreign media. This is a man who lived the Iraqi experience. He was born and bred. He came to this country as a refugee because of what was stirred up. Anyway.
we have a lot to answer. We have a lot to answer for, don't we? I mean, the
absolutely.
Western imperialism has been just like an absolute disaster, and is an ongoing disaster. I mean, we might end up in. Sorry, go on. Yes, please continue.
To this day, despite even to this day, there's no formal admissions of the depleted uranium that was dropped in Iraq in the first two Gulf Wars or whatever.
Exactly. The depleted uranium. I mean, there's so many children being born with deformities, gross deformities. I don't even know how those women are actually being able to look after those children with those kind of deformities. And and I've just reading just recently. The bombing of Mosul and that area, there's been like 40,000 people or something have been killed just recently, the civilians in that area. 40,000 with all the bombings, and this is the so-called, you know what I mean? It's just, and this will be more depleted uranium in the, Three bombs every 3 bombs every hour of every day for 8 years under Obama, and this was depleted uranium. So I mean, a lot of that would have been depleted uranium. Just absolutely appalling.
I'll get to that in a minute. I'll just finish the story. Because
sure, no worries.
You raised an important one, but more bombs were dropped on Iraq under Barack Obama's administration and previous administration, the Bush administration. That's the disaster and the debacle that we live in. And the lives of today. And please remind me of Syria. Just please remind me, because there's something I'd like to say about that, about the missile strike.
Sorry, what was that? I missed that. What was that? Sorry?
Just after I finish the wheelchair, remind me about Syria. And I'll mention something because it's laughable, and sadly and tragically laughable, what they claim to say was the first strike on Iraq. On Syria. But with that shipment to Samoa, we decided to send it to Najaf, Lamadi and Samoa to send a message that we're here for everybody and split that container amongst food. Since then, we've sent 2,000 wheelchairs to Iraq since that first shipment.
2,000.
2,000, and that's met the unmet need of 1/5 of the children of Iraq who've been debilitated, crippled, or who've lost limbs and legs. And I've seen some horrific images. Anyway, you wouldn't. All of us have seen horrific images, but I've had photos sent to me hours after children have been blown apart or whatever, and trying to say what's little left of them after their legs are gone. 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and we live in cruelties and grim realities that, I don't know what more to say. But we did get that shipment to Iraq. But what happened was when we were trying to get it to Basra, to the port of Qasr, near Basra, all of a sudden we realized that there were the sanctions, the UN sanctions of no ships into Basra, and that was 2007. So no shipping company would go in. And then what we did was we weren't going to give up. Riyadh was despairing. We contacted Christopher Evans, the Labor senator, and asked him if he could get them somehow by Hercules to Kuwait. Now that was wishful thinking. He did. Senator Chris Evans organised, and there was a lot of resistance, but he went through with it. So sometimes it's what I say, the Andrew Peacock, Christopher Evans, you tap into there's compassion in all people. It's what we've got to tap into, not give up on.
Sometimes it comes through.
Sometimes it comes through. But there are great evils, great cruelties, and wrongs that are done under the sun on this earth that will have no excuse, and even all the compassion in the world makes no difference. But we're trying to tap into it. But Christopher Evans organised for a Hercules from Moorebank Air Base to fly them to Kuwait. So we then journeyed them from Perth by truck to Sydney, to Moorebank Air Base. I think it's in Baytown, I can't remember. And they were flown by Riyadh and got himself to Iraq. He'd gone back after being away for a dozen years since the Gulf War. He came here as a refugee boy. And he met them on the Iraqi-Kuwait border. The ADF transported them from the airport in Kuwait, Kuwait City Airport, to the Iraqi border, and then from there on, a military escort with Australian military escort and others with Riyadh took them to Najaf, Lamadi, and Samoa. And then since then we've sent 2,000 But we've
Oh,
sent 37,000 to 73 countries. So if anyone wants to get involved with wheelchairs for kids, all you've got to do is
mm.
Google wheelchairs for kids or contact me. Anything that you can do, any donation or any support would be great. But we've
Yes,
got them
I'll
to
leave,
live.
Jerry, I'll leave a link in the information section, in the comment section of that. Gerry, I was just going to ask you, do you have any dealings with, the Palestinians, like wheelchairs for kids in relation to Palestinians? Are you able to tap into that? Because I imagine with all the unbelievable,
We're
like
trying.
after 2014.
We've had some problems in trying to get them across to Palestine. We're working on that. I'm working with a good friend who's like I say, I tap into all people. I try and extract every dividend of change agencies from whomever, whenever. So whether they're Labor or Liberal or Greens, or whether they're the right wing or the left wing, if there's some capacity to do something good, then that needs to be done. That's how we relieve something in real time for people in need. That's what I care about, real time outcomes. So there's a New South Wales parliamentarian. He was the first Muslim parliamentarian, although he's not a devout Muslim, to be honest.
Mm.
And his partner's Japanese. He's a Lebanese-born parliamentarian. His name's Shaukat Musselman. And
What was his name again? What was his
Shaukat
name?
Musselman, but it phonetically sounds Musselman. Mosbelmane. If people want to Google him, Shaukat is Shauquet. He's helped me an awful lot with raising funds for wheelchairs, so we can because we've still got to pay for the shipping costs. It doesn't come for free, and him and I have raised hundreds of thousands together to make that happen. We've sent wheelchairs to Libya, to Iraq, to Lebanon, to some of the most impoverished regions and war-torn regions around, and other countries too. The list is long. We'll
That's
also be
great.
traveling. We'll also be traveling to Lombok in Indonesia in October. Coming with me, I've just paid for the shipment of wheelchairs to meet the entire unmet need of the children of Lombok. So all the children of Lombok who need a rough terrain wheelchair will have one from October onwards, and I'll be in Lombok to see this happen.
Oh,
See them
that's
properly.
fantastic. That's
But
really great.
you asked me about Palestine. This is why I
Mm.
love Lee Rhiannon, because she's such an outspoken person, and this bullshit of the years back. This is why I mean, don't compromise your convictions. He was bullshit because he's a hero to me too, or whatever. And I love Bob Brown and his stuff and work. But it was crap for Bob Brown to try and shut down and other Greens members to shut down Lee Rhiannon from speaking publicly about Palestine. And
Oh, really? Was he
yeah,
trying to shut down Lee Rhiannon for
I think
speaking publicly
yes,
about
that goes
Palestine?
back. She was in the Australian about 5, 6 years ago, writing on about Palestine and the squatter camps and the wrongs, and Australia should be standing up for Palestine too and Palestinian suffering. And Bob Brown and the kitchen cabinet and the Greens wanted to shut her down because they thought they were going to lose votes. They were going to the wider church of culture where they like to lose votes. And that's wrong. That's just wrong. As much as I
Yeah.
vote for the Greens, that's wrong. You don't do that. You don't close the
They're
door on
getting a bit.
Palestinian.
Do you think they're getting a bit more watered down, the Greens, these days, Gerry? I mean, they don't
I
seem
think,
to have many. They're very reactive, but they don't seem to have any vision anymore, if they ever did. You know
well,
what I mean?
it's not. Look, I left the Greens, but I still vote for the Greens, and I have to declare that I did challenge Rachel Stewart for the Senate, and it was going to be either me or Rachel Stewart. But Rachel Stewart. I was too radical for the Greens, and I
Isn't
think that
that's sad? That's sad. I
I
mean,
think
I see your positions are basic, for basic human rights, and you know what I mean. Like they're all just, if you're too radical for the Greens, I mean, that what does that say about the Greens?
well,
Not much.
I think the Greens are up and down. I think there are good people in the Greens. I think they hold on some issues really well. I think they're remembering that this is a conservative country, they appear the most radical discourse that we have from the political paradigm that's Parliament. So there's not anyone better than the Greens. There are some
Mm.
individuals in the Labor Party who are just as radical as the most radical left-wingers, but who compromise themselves horrifically. I was disappointed in how Anna Burke reduced herself to almost non-existent as a radical left-winger. So I was disappointed in many Greens and Labour lads who never played out the left and compromise. It's just like the Peter Garrett thing, sort of like. How can you say that you're a social justice warrior for anti-Iranian and all that, and then prove that you're Iranian now?
Peter Garrett from Midnight Oil, yeah. I mean, he was completely useless. But you know what I found though, which is completely lacking in Australian discourse today, is anything that's sort of anti-war. I even noticed with the welcome, the Welcome to Australia marches they have. My partner and I recently went on one, and we had this very large quote by Noam Chomsky on a banner about, if you want to end terrorism, basically is an easy way, and that stopped participating in it. And basically we were kind of kept out of, any sort of camera, view, and it was all sanitized, and none of the speakers talked about, any of the wars. It's almost, this is in Tasmania. It was almost as if all these asylum seekers just popped out of a vacuum, and there was no sort of war. We weren't participating in any kind of imperialist wars trundling along behind the United States. And this is sort of like there's complete absence of an anti-war movement really in Australia. And this is where all these terrible injuries are coming from, that, with the wheelchairs for kids and all the depleted uranium. And yet there's all the cause, any focus on the cause from any of the media, the Murdoch-owned media, but even the ABC, there's just really no, you know what I mean? And it's just so frightening. I find it frightening.
That Tasmanian Forum you're talking about, who sponsored that?
It was Welcome to Australia is the name of the thing, and it's supposed to be it's supposed to be a positive thing about welcoming asylum seekers instead of this Islamophobia that's been happening in Australia. But it's like it's completely sanitized. There's no real talk about any wars or anything from the speakers. This is sort of all the speakers, the Greens and all the speakers that got up that day.
I agree with you, Tricia. I agree with you. That's
terrible.
The problem. We're talking about people without keeping to conviction. In their hearts, they'll say to me, as Rudd said, or as others have said, or as some Greens have said, or some Laborites have said, Gerry, it's about who manages the economy, it's about who wins government, it's about us getting more of our parliamentarians in to make a difference. But in the meantime, we're losing people in greater numbers than ever before, more wars. Right now the languages with all the pronounced negative Islamophobia, with all the stuff about terrorism, all the stuff about war. If we start taking away 15, 20 years ago, the anti-war movements were powerful, and much more so by today. Today they're absent completely, or they're not included in the debate. If the Greens, and obviously they're going to refute what I'm saying here or whatever, or if the Labor right got up, or an authentic left winger got up who's actually within these movements, even if they're a liberal right or the Nationals, and got up and started talking about anti-war, their party would smash them down in 10 seconds flat and tell them no, because war is seen as the only mechanism to protect us now. Whatever. The language has got that bad, the xenophobia, the misogyny, misogyny meaning hate of the foreigner, as opposed to xenophobia, which means the fear of the stranger or the foreigner. The misogyny has got so bad, and the threat of the presumption of terrorism has become so pronounced that talking about war makes us, its absence makes us naive, or whatever. It's the same thing with prison abolition. But there's to be no talk about that, because the party's been scaremongering into the need for law and order, and otherwise we'll be run over by the lawless. Our people, the consciousness of the nation, the stream of consciousness is that such that there is a threat of radical groups around the world, and that they can blow us up any day, they can infiltrate.
Yes.
And if we don't have border controls, if we don't have now
it's just fear mongering.
It's
just fear mongering and scare. Yeah.
They are political parties that actually got caught up in winning votes in this default position of restricted discourse of how they can win votes within that. You will never see anyone get up on Q&A, any politician, and say, no, let's have an anti-war movement, because it's not seen plausible anymore. It's not seen real. It's not seen capable. That's how we've diminished the conversation to such a point that pronounced
I know. Yes, exactly. It's like it's just completely absent. It's worse than the US. I mean, the US at least has, these various anti-war groups, the Black Alliance for Peace and Code Pink and all these different ones. They have something, but in Australia, I don't really know. There is no real anti-war movement to speak of, and this is outrageous because, like, I mean, I went on the march in 2003 with against the Iraq War, and there's been really nothing to speak of, and there's no discourse in the media. I just don't
Well,
know what's happened. It's
if you look at our university campuses, there are 44 universities in this country today. I'm a former guild president in my time as a student. I'm a former general manager of a student guild for several years. I was more political than the students. And in the end, where there was an anti-war movement, say 10 to 15 years ago on university campuses, there's none today. No one on a campus speaks about, they'll speak about poverty, they'll speak about various issues, they'll
yeah.
speak about diversity, but not anti-war. Not
What's
that.
happened? What do you think
Well,
has happened that it's gotten to that point? Because I've always seen a lot of Australians as fairly fair and stuff. But I don't know if it's the lack of
the
news about
cultivation
it.
of fear. The cultivation of fear. There's an omission.
Cultivation of fear, right?
The cultivation of fear. There's censorship by omission of what's actually driving and fueling these wars. We talked about the Arab Spring and how it was manufactured and exploited by foreign policy, by other powers that were external to the national interests of those countries and to the rights of people, and how that's always manipulated. The WikiLeaks tables show all that stuff up, whether it's Syria,
Yes.
whether it's Haiti, the horrific things with Washington,
I'm,
London, and all the various instruments of state due to other nations in order to exploit an outcome to suit the interests of external powers and elites.
And look at how they just leave Julian, as our government leaves Julian Assange twisting in the wind. Hasn't, who is speaking out for that man? He's been in that place now 5 years or something. I mean, I don't know. And it's like he doesn't exist. Australian government treat him like he doesn't exist. They're quite happy to let him just kind of be, if he ever leaves that embassy. I don't know if he's ever going to be able to leave that Ecuadorian embassy in safety. And we've done nothing to help
Well,
him, really.
it's sad he didn't get his voice through Parliament. I once said to the Greens that, they're going to get upset with me saying this, but when we were running for WikiLeaks, I had actually said you should be running in with the Greens. You guys are running with Dr. Janet Rice in Victoria. Well, she's just another senator or whatever. You've already got 8, 9 or whatever you had at the time, and they've got 10 now. And they should have run him as their number one candidate for Victoria.
Yeah, Julian Assange. Did you say, who did you say that to? Who did you say that to?
The Greens power brokers when we were actually working out.
Oh, the Greens.
Said,
The Greens, okay.
They said,
The power brokers.
They said to me, we're the Greens and we run Greens candidates. We'll give our first preference to Julian, but it wasn't a consideration to run him. I reckon Janet Rice, what value, yeah, she might be a good human being and all that sort of stuff. What value is Janet Rice to the Senate, to the Parliament, and to politics when compared to Julian Assange?
Yeah, really.
Compared to Julian Assange.
Yeah,
How
really.
many do they need?
I mean, he's a hero. He's a hero, and we've just abandoned him. And I mean, I'm ashamed, and I'm ashamed that he is. That he's had to seek asylum elsewhere. He can't where our government has done this to him. And yet it's not surprising because we just trundle along behind whatever US empire wants, and we benefit from it as well, from their invasions and whatever. But it's just appalling. I just feel it's just so appalling. And I don't know. I'm sort of totally.
We talk about US empire. What appalled me was. Can you hear me, Tricia?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
What appalled me was when What appalled me was when they dropped those missiles from the US war machine naval carrier or whatever on the airport Al Shafat in Damascus in Syria earlier this year. And they pretended that they finally crossed the red line, that they're finally going to strike back to Syria, the Syrian government, that they're finally going to strike back. Were they kidding us? And when was the media to actually correct that?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no established media. Forget the Murdoch Rags and the News Limited and all those
yeah.
types. Or whatever. And despite that there are good people in the media, it's the editors that make the call, it's the copy editors that run what they want.
There's some
Because I
great,
know there's
there's
some
some
great
great
journalists,
Oh no,
but
there's some great journalists that are like Ava Bartlett and Vanessa Beeley. In fact, Vanessa Beeley, if we're fortunate enough, I'm supposed to be chatting to her next Friday. If she's got some time, she's pretty busy and stuff, but she's supposed to be chatting next Friday, and they're actually on the ground, so they know what's happening. And most of the stuff that you'll hear about is just propaganda about the Assad government and all the and killing his own citizens and all this kind of stuff with chemical weapons.
it's
See,
all bullshit. It's all
yeah,
bullshit. What they say happened in
and it's
Latakia
even been
and
proven.
Cuba.
To Seymour Hersh did a recent
Yeah,
article about it. Seymour Hersh,
absolutely.
yeah, and he completely debunked that whole thing of him attacking his own citizens and stuff. But anyway, it's
I,
just
I
typical.
often I often say, Tricia, the ability to discover the truth is outstripped by the capacity to manifest deceit. The ability to discover the truth is outstripped by the capacity to manifest deceit. Look, Obama claimed he never crossed that line to actually attack Syria, or whatever, when he felt like he should be attacking Syria and taking on the Assad regime. What a load of shit. And Trump reckoned, well, enough's enough, and then he dropped those missiles. Are they kidding us? They've been attacking Syria non-stop. Before those missiles were
Yeah.
dropped, I think there were 59 or 61 missiles that were dropped on Al-Shaqqa. 73,000 bombs.
Mm,
73,000 bombs have dropped on Syria.
mm, mm,
By the American and the British, by
yeah,
the US and British and Australian forces too, but by that
yeah.
coalition, American-led 73,000 bombs uh, uh, prior to those missiles being dropped had been dropped on Syria. The
Mm,
devastation of Syria, the flood of
yeah.
these refugees is not the work of Assad alone, whatever, right? Or the Alawites, or all the other peoples, or the radical groups, or whatever. It is the predominant
Yeah,
hand
Western
of the
intervention.
coalition of Western
Mm.
intervention. That's what's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
been happening.
I know,
It
and
started
you can
with
always follow them, follow the what we're doing from the West and the devastation. It's just sort of like a systemic, picking one off country off after another, and then we're not happy now. The Western governments U.S. empire's trying to destabilize Venezuela and destroy that, and it just sort of goes on and on
absolutely.
and on. But anyway, Gerry, I think we're heading into almost an hour and a half now, so maybe we might wrap it up. But it's been really great chatting with you, and I just wanted to, I've learned a lot about you. I didn't know, and I just sort of and just some of the great work that Wheelchairs for Kids is fantastic. And I just wanted to ask you: is there anything really that you might like to sort of say? Is there anything that you'd like to say at the end of a particular issue, or something that else that we can do to support Indigenous peoples in Australia, or anything that you'd like to sort of leave our viewers with?
Okay, when it comes to Indigenous or First Nations or First Peoples issues, when it comes to culture and consensus amongst themselves, and I never speak to any of that. But we're all brothers and sisters. We're all one colour made many, unfortunately. We're all black, brown, and white, but we're really one colour. We're just human beings. We've all just got to be there for each other. And there's no greater legacy than to help improve the lot of another. And if we can change lives, then we can do that. If people want to find out a little bit more, I'd love them to sort of look up other things or whatever too. There's the First Nations Homelessness Project. If you Google that, First Nations Homelessness Project,
I'll put a
that
link in there, Gerry. I'll put
yeah,
a link to
yeah,
that, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That's a lot of white people, 1,400 volunteers working with a black mob, the Malamaya mob, and they've prevented 100% of the time evictions from public housing rentals for First Nations families. We've got in this country 18,000 children under the age of 12 on our streets. That's still known by household Australians. A lot of them are because of eviction. This program works to support families, helps families. They're out there today in Perth actually preventing an eviction. They've got a 100% track record. Public housing, once they intervene, steps back. And this mob actually works with the most critically at risk, the families that others have given up on. So it's about, never giving up on people and helping them. There's also Malamaya, Ngalla, second word Maya, founded by Mervanese, and a chap who spent almost 18 years of his life in and out of prison. His parents died at 10 in a car accident. He was brought up by his grandparents. He was in juvenile at 13, detention. And then he lost a brother to suicide, his youngest brother. He turned his life around, and he's become one of my best mates. And I've kicked him up a little bit of federal funding, whatever, to keep on going with what he's doing in Malamai. He's got more people across the line from prison than the established orgs in this country that get all the lucrative funding. He's on the smell of an oily rag. He got more people. He got 140 people across the line without any remuneration for any of the people helping. Into training and then jobs and then earning full-time employment and earning $2,000 a week or whatever for the first time in their lives after having never worked, transforming lives. And I was at a function yesterday where they were bringing more people across the line. They remain organic. I hope they become a signature piece way forward. If people can support Malamaya, that'd be great. Learn more about them. Their website's still organic, but I love that sort of stuff. And this is the way to transform lives, because we're not going to reduce the offending by all this other piecemeal stuff. We're going to reduce it. And you've got to remember the crimes are poverty related. They can be, the start has been skewed and it's been said to be this and that by compounding charges and so forth or whatever else. But most of it is poverty related. We can change a lot of people by helping them. This is the stuff I love to see. He's an incredible brother and he's a leader in his field. But Malamaya is an incredible way forward. And they work in tandem with the First Nations Homelessness Project too. And if people want to learn more about other projects that I'm involved in, I've set up a non-tertiary based institute, despite all my other tertiary work. It's called the Institute of Social Justice and Human Rights. It's
The Institute of Social, the Institution Institute of Social Justice
and Human Rights, yeah. isjhr.com.au. A few friends
isjhr.com.au. Okay then. Okay.
And the other ones, and there's the First Nations Homelessness Project website. There's the Malamaya website. If you can put those links up, Tricia, that'd be great. And people can learn more and get involved. And the wheelchairs for kids side, that'd be great. These are the warm stories that give me hope to keep on going on. And look, we've also all of us have got to remember this. We can all help one another, whether it's white brothers and sisters who are living below the poverty line, who are doing it tough, whether it's brown brothers and sisters. And there's something about the suicides I'd like to finish up on with or whatever. Right? Yes. Suicides are getting more because the accumulation of stresses and pressures and our misspending of faith in needless belief systems and expectations and the sense of failure are getting more heightened and pronounced as pressures of poverty related are building up, and always having to prove ourselves within that paradigm of reported achievements. But we've got more than 3,000 registered suicides of Australians now each year. That crisis will continue to go up. It won't get less. But nearly one third of the suicides, it was 1/4, but now 1/3 of the suicides are migrant brothers and sisters of people born overseas. Refugees are at elevated risk for suicide, who have become Australian citizens. And, the suicides of our migrant brothers and sisters is dramatic. It's little known by household Australians.
Really? Do you know, have you did you I might have missed the statistics of the suicides, because I was been thinking it has to be pretty bad, because the way generally, this issue is being treated in Australia is just appalling. So what was the statistics for the suicides?
So if in the last reported year we had 3,000 suicides of Australians, 3,000 Australian suicides. More than 800 were of migrant brothers and sisters.
Really? Wow.
Elevated risk groups include Eastern European women newly arrived. Elevated risk groups include Central Asians, particularly Indians and Sri Lankans and Kazakhstanis, Tajikistanis, Afghanis. Elevated risk groups include newly arrived Chinese. Elevated risk groups include newly arrived Eastern Africans, Somalis, and Sudanese, and it's only going to get worse. And poverty will be a compounding factor. The struggles, also having to deal within the narrative of poverty from a high cultural content, language diverse background is problematic. What we need to do is forget the research and just disaggregate the elevated risk groups and support them. But that's the population group I just spoke about. I'm a suicide prevention researcher, and on the way forward for people in general. I've spent a lot of my time with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander because it's a much more pronounced issue. 1 in 10 deaths, 1 in 18 officially, but 1 in 10 deaths in my estimation for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are of people living below the poverty. 1 in 10 deaths are a suicide. But it's a crisis for all Australians. It's just a humanitarian, catastrophic crisis for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But it's going to get worse for all Australians before it gets better. And if I disaggregate just quickly to the categorical groups, which are actually higher, when we go to the elevated risk groups categorical as opposed to population groups, it's dramatically worse. As a population group, the highest risk group is actually the Kimberley's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, where between 10 and 15% of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicides occur. But just as high, and little known, just as high as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander suicide rate of the Kimberley is also the peninsula of the York Peninsula, far north Queensland. They've got a suicide rate just as high there. It's just that their population is smaller in crew total to the Kimberley one. Western Queensland is high too, northern.
Kowanyama, yeah.
Kowanyama's high, the peninsula, Kowanyama, Hope,
Yes.
Mossman, Lockhart, all the way to the Torres. But also the Arnhem and also other parts of the Northern Territory. The more west and north we go, the worse it gets. And but when I go to the categorical groups, which are 3 and 4 times higher than these highest population groups that's segregated, such as the Kimberley Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, the highest, the most elevated risk group of suicide are and for all Australians, and much more pronounced for Black Australians, and then thereafter Brown Australians. But Brown Australians, I mean people from countries overseas, such as parts of Europe and Asia and the Africas, and I consider myself Brown. But the most elevated risk groups categorically are individuals who, as children, were removed from their biological families. They are 4 times higher than even the highest segregated population group in the nation. Individuals who have been removed from their families, so we haven't done the trauma-informed recovery, and we should be doing everything we can to keep families together where possible and improve their life. Thereafter, then, it's actually children who have been removed from their families. The number of kids that I deal with their families who have become suicide affected because of the loss of children that have been removed from them. And that's the statistics that I was talking about. 80% of our suicides, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, 80% of our suicides Australians are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children 12 years and less. 30% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children 8 to 17 years and less. 30% of the total Australian suicide toll. But look, after then, it's actually former inmates. In the first year post-release, black, brown and white, you're 10 times more likely to lose your life than while in prison, while in custody. In the first year post-release, most of those suicides will occur in the first couple of months, or other unnatural deaths, substance abuse, and this is why, and unnatural deaths, risk-taking deaths, all that sort of stuff. There's a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. People, in my experience, come out of prison, and I visit prisons and work with as many as I can, come out worse than what they went in. We don't do anything enough, and for the majority we do nothing. The people in the situational trauma of prison incarceration, they come out generally worse than what they went in. We degenerate them into various ongoing trauma, complex traumas, disordered thinking, and for many degenerate into aggressive traumas, which they become almost irrecoverable from. But this is why Nalamaya is such a beautiful thing. It's why I care about what they do with ex-offenders. They go in their pre-release juvenile detention and adult prisons and take people to a positive self and to hope on the horizon. And we're there for them post-release. And also And the next biggest group that's at elevated risk after former inmates and children removed from their families are actually evictees. People who
I'm
have been
sorry, what was
evicted
that, Gerry? I'm sorry, the audio is not
people,
so great.
people who are evicted, families who are evicted from
Oh, yes.
public rental housing, and
Mm.
they're in the hundreds. Each year we evict hundreds of people, hundreds of families in each state and jurisdiction from their public rental houses. Now, the terminology is played with, so you can hide this. They form terminations instead of evictions in many instances because they put them on fixed term tenancies and then terminate that. And when they're not on fixed term tenancies, and they've got long term tenancy, well, then they have to use the appropriate language, which is actually an eviction. But the evictions are in the hundreds, obviously much more pronounced for black brothers and sisters. But all it takes, is to just work with these families, help them through their pronounced issues. Most of them are single parent families who are taking in other members who are vulnerable, who are in overcrowded conditions, who don't want to turn away people. We can work through these issues, and something like these people are just as high risk as former inmates coming out from prison, and we evict them. Recently, we fought tooth and nail to the First Nations Homeless Project, which asked for help when they moved into a new region, and a mother was about to be evicted. She was pregnant with 4 weeks to go to pregnancy. She was to be evicted with a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And I couldn't believe the Department of Housing was prepared to evict them. Their lawyers were onto it. I lost my cool. I blew my lid. Jenny Kasagan, who runs the First Nations Homeless Project, is a much more cool customer. I had to engage a lawyer friend who did a pro bono effort. And then, I even went higher than that or whatever to really get them to stand back as they do in general in other regions, Department of Housing, for the First Nations Homeless Project to do their bit. Anyway, that lady yesterday delivered a baby, and she's in her home, and the eviction was prevented. But this is what we have on our streets. Sort of like I've seen babies born on streets, whole families on streets. Like I said, 18,000 children aged 12 years and less live on our streets, right
Yeah.
throughout the country.
What was that statistic again? Sorry, what was that statistic?
This is the Australian Bureau of Statistics. This is the
Yeah.
ABS.
Yeah.
18,000 children aged 12 years and less are homeless rough in this country. Most Australian households will not comprehend or even believe that. But that's the reality. That's something our news doesn't take out well enough, and hasn't made a big
Shameful.
issue. Yeah. But look, also in data, I'll finish on this note because I know we've gone the hour.
Oh, that's all right.
We play with a lot of, we skew the data, and we omit the facts. We want to tell a good news story. We want to tell all sorts of stuff in a positive way. And that's a good thing to tell positive stories that can inspire change. But we can't stitch people by not telling the truth. I'm going to finish on this note on our black brothers and sisters, on our Indigenous, First Nations, First People, the descendants of the first people of this continent. We have been told by the ABS, and I've talked to the ABS about this, we have been told that they are now living life expectancy is 10.6 years differential between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. That's not true. That is not true. That is what they've done. The government, the federal government, years ago, funded them $30 million to research and to work on new methodologies to translate data in different ways. And it was about life expectancy and estimations of children born today. Now, I background this with the closing the gap targets, which I had a lot to actually do in chasing down to show that they were failing, and then also with the millennium targets. And they've not lived up to the estimations, because that's what they are, estimations, something that we actually hope for, want. But there's a lot of drivers that need to be fulfilled to actually make these achievable. The millennium goals, for instance, which weren't achieved, at that, the targets and indicators that were sought, and the closing the gap targets, which we know all failed. And in the closing the gap speech this year by the Prime Minister, I got a mention for my work, and I was actually in their report on health. But I'm not going to stay here or be out on anything. I get frustrated when I hear it's 10.6 years. That's an
Yes.
estimation that's been created, manufactured, that we hope that children born today who are black will live to only 10.6 years less than children who are not Indigenous born today.
Yeah.
But I'll give you the real data. I'll give you the
Okay.
real data. The real data is this, and it's ABS data too. And
Uh-huh.
in 2014, according to deaths in Western Australia, the median age of death of Aboriginal males is 49.9. That's the last reported data. 50
Yeah.
years of age, 49.9. That's not 10.6 years less.
No.
That's 30
No, that's
years
way
plus.
less. Yeah,
30
yeah.
years less. That's the median is 30 years less of
Yeah,
living.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
49.9 median means that half the people in
I
that
mean,
lot of deaths was less than 49 years. The highest in the nation, Tricia, the highest
mm,
in the nation for Aboriginal male deaths in 2014 was New South Wales, 58.8. That the
right,
highest one was still 20 plus years less. So it's not
right.
10.6. In Northern Territory, it's 52 years. In Tasmania, it's still in the 50s. In Tasmania, it's still in the 50s. And
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
for women, it's about 60 odd around the country or whatever. It's still 20 years less or whatever,
yeah.
not 10.6. So
No.
we should be telling the truth that things have not got better. And let's also realize that more people are identifying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander today proud in their heritage who haven't actually lived as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. We have 730,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have identified in our population cohort as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. That should be skewing the data positively to making them look better. But if we disaggregate to those who have always been recognised and lived as black, who have lived black, for instance, in the Northern Territory or the Arnhem or the Western Desert or the Kimberley,
Mm,
and we stand alone to that disaggregation. The statistics are even much more damning. They live less.
mm.
In the Kimberley, one in three will be dead by 45. One in three will be dead by 45. On that note,
Yes,
but look,
that's
by the same token, I'm an optimist. If I wasn't, I believe that we should always plug forward, but we need the truth. We need the truth
yes,
to know the state of our world. We need the truth to understand what's going on in other countries. We need the truth behind the refugee crisis. We need the truth and our convictions to stay solid. We need the truth at all times. We should never compromise the truth.
absolutely.
Despite the forces against us, we need the truth in all politics. We need the truth about suicides, about what's driving suicide, what's driving incarceration, what's driving poverty, what's driving this and that. We need the truth about climate change. We need the truth about, sentient animals being corralled and there's no such thing as free range. Free range is a load of bullshit too.
Yes,
Whatever,
it's a nonsense.
But on
Here,
that note,
here,
much like,
Gerry. That's so great. That need deserves a meme. That last that deserves somebody to make an image of, because that's so true. We need the truth about all those things, and if you can't be honest about it, how can you even move forward and do anything? You know, if we can't be honest
you
with
can't.
ourselves, that's so
If we're not honest,
fantastic.
if we're not honest, we're moving in other directions, not in the
Yeah,
right directions. We're not even
exactly.
moving in the right directions. We're all over the place and grasping, and our frustrations are growing, and that's leading to that groundswell that you were describing before of what's happening across the world. And there's a groundswell of
Mm.
frustration. Are we moving in the right direction? That's a different question. But there's a groundswell of frustration that should be moving in the right directions, but we're not getting all the truth and we're not piecing it all together. And the majority of people, we're all at odds, and many of us are in pitchfork standoffs with each other, even those who are in searching for the truth, because we're not getting it
Yes,
all. I mean, the truth is what we need, and the truth is what we often get denied, or majorly denied. And
totally.
our leadership lets us down. Our leadership lets us down.
Absolutely.
There are good people in that leadership, just like there
Yeah.
are good people in the media, just like there are good people here and there, and just like there are good people in bureaucracy in Canberra, but they
Mm.
frustrate me because they restrict themselves to preserving a job or preserving tenure or preserving their personal opportunity
Mm.
or their relations to power. And
Yeah.
that's sad. I'd rather be, Gough Whitlam had his faults. He screwed over Timor and, he got caught up in that Pakistani loan, scandal, but he was a good human being. I'd rather be a Gough Whitlam and achieve what he achieved in that short span of time that he did, the legacy that he had, and
Yeah.
achieve some of the things that he did. And
Yes,
rather be him than the others. Rather be him than the others who spent 10, 20, and 30 years and made a career out of whatever they're
truly.
engaged in,
Yeah,
and achieve much, 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 much less,
yeah,
almost insignificant, paled into time. But,
yeah.
it matters who we are. And our days on this earth are few and far. We almost say they're few, but it matters what we do with our days. And I don't know why we live in these lives where we get obsessed with the faults and carry on as if we're going to live forever. And
I
really,
know.
the example that
Yeah.
we have.
Yeah, really, we do carry on as if we're going to live to it forever. Oh, thank you so much, Gerry. I really, really appreciate you taking the time because I know how busy you are, and I hope that in a few months, we might be able to have you back to talk about some other issues and give us updates on that. It was so great to have you, and such a pleasure to know you. I feel like I know you much better than I did before this interview. So thanks so much, and thanks everybody for watching. And we'll round it up here, Gerry, and thank you so much for coming. And we'll talk again in the future, I'm sure.
Thank you, Trish. Much respect.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay, well, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Join Naked Empire next week, and hopefully, if we're very lucky, we'll have Vanessa Beeley. Excuse me, Gerry, I'm just going to go out of the screen for a sec. We'll have Vanessa Beeley for hopefully to talk about what's happening on the ground in Syria, and she also has some other interesting information and a wonderful independent journalist. So I hope you'll join us for that. So we'll just say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. And thanks so much, Gerry, for joining us. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.